Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Just for the sake of transparency, I'm recording this presentation once again because in the previous one I made a mistake and the slides were not shown. So that's why I'm repeating this recording of the presentation. So if you feel that I am a little bit less brilliant, although I'm not very brilliant when I talk to nobody in front of myself, but it's also because I'm recording it again. So today we are going to speak about pollution, and once I think 20 or 30 years ago, there was some debate about pollution. There was a movement of citizens that wanted the pollution out, that wanted pollution out of the cities, for instance. And but in Western countries, this is less strong. Although there are situations, for instance, I can think about Taranto in Italy and other places in Italy in which the awareness is very high. But again, we are going to talk about the damage that pollution is doing to our health and the fact that pollution is really a threat for environment and for many human activities, starting with agriculture. What is pollution? There are several kinds of pollution. We are not going to talk about noise pollution, although it is damaging somehow, especially in many of our cities. And there is soil pollution, there is water pollution, there is air pollution, and then we are going to talk about these kinds of pollution. And there is radioactive pollution, although I would like to talk about it. We are not going to talk about it because it would be too broad for 1 hour. So let's see which are the environmental pollutants that we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about air, and in the air we are going to talk about particulates. That is very, very important as a source of pollution, especially coming from traffic jam, but not not only from cars and other vehicles. We have nitrogen oxides, we have sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds. You see that CO2 is not in this list. Of course, if you have a large source of CO2, CO2 is very damaging, very threatening for your health and for your life. But generally speaking, the kind of pollution that is coming from CO2 is more damaging for climate and for the environment than for our health, not directly sometimes, most of the times. While carbon monoxide is directly threatening our health. Think about, for instance, a fire that can seriously damage your health and your life. Water. In the water, we have nitrates and phosphates, hydrocarbons, microplastics, solvents and pesticides, and biological pathogens. And water was the first kind of pollution that was dealt with in many countries. I still remember when the River Thames was really polluted, and at a certain moment they decided to deal with that. And then River Thames they became very, very, very well, not healthy, but at least much less polluted. And then it was done recently. Also, the river in Paris, the River Seine, I think it should be in English, was cleaned up and is becoming much less polluted than in the past. Of course, in cities, one of the threats were biological pathogens because of all the dumping of the biological waste from the houses, and so the fecal bacteria and so on have been a big problem both for the rivers and for the sea itself. Soil, we have again pesticides and herbicides, heavy metals, hydrocarbons, microplastic again, plastics again, industrial chemicals, and electric waste. There are many sources of pollution and pollutants, of course. We have seen that several times we have been hearing, listening about agriculture with pesticides and ammonia and many other sorts of pollution. Of course, we have wildfires and fires in general. In the Mediterranean area, this is a big source of pollution, and again, climate change is a multiplier of this problem. So, although most of the fires in the Mediterranean countries, especially the European Mediterranean countries, are not natural at all, but they are. There are criminals who start the fires. The consequences of the fires are much larger because the vegetation is very dry and the heat is very high during the heat waves, and the winds are quite relevant for the fires, and so all these different factors that are increased by climate change can make the fires very big. So the pollution coming from the fires much bigger. And then everybody can think about the factories and vehicles and towns and homes, especially heating and also cooling, but especially heating systems, and shippings, airplanes, and so on. In many countries, there are papers in which they calculate all the different sources of pollution, and they check how the pollution is going. In the Environmental Union, we have the main report on the state of the environment once a year by the European Environment Agency. And in the States, there is the EPA report on the environment, and in many other countries, there are similar papers. In the European Union, each country have got their own report. So, what about the air in the EU? Of course, the level of pollution is decreasing for many of the pollutants we have been seeing in the previous slides, but there are pollutants that are more difficult than others to be reduced. For instance, ammonia, that is the biggest challenge in the EU, the 27 member states of the European Union. There is also a challenge coming from reducing more the pollution because, of course, sometimes it's difficult to, after you have reduced the more macroscopic sources of pollution, then it's difficult to look at all this apparently small sources of pollution that are making the difference all the same. The other thing that is very important is also to look at the sources of pollution more difficult to be dealt with. For instance, ammonia that is coming mainly from agriculture is quite difficult to be dealt with, as we saw in a previous slide. And but as for sources of climate change gas emissions, we should avoid to say that there is somebody that is less pollutants. Of course, all the pollutants are important and must be dealt with. It's also important for countries like mine, Italy, not to feel that they have the right to wait and to postpone decisions. And for instance, for the air pollution, Italy has been questioned a lot of time on how efficient and how good are the measures that have been taken, but especially the measures that should have been taken and they weren't. So that's something quite challenging, especially because the governments and also cities and regions tend to take measures that are really sort of emergency measures, while they should try and take more structural measures and policies. So we should also try to reduce particular matters among the others that we already mentioned. Particularly matters is very dangerous for our lungs. The smaller it is, the more damaging it is, and it is coming not only from the traffic jam, but also from the manufacture and the extractive sectors and the energy supply sectors. So as you can see here, the nitrogen oxides are coming also from the road transport sector. Water pollution in the EU. Well, as I said, a lot of efforts have been done, but there is also a lot to be done, and the action should continue. Also because some of the system clean the waters, purify the waters, must be managed and must be well managed all over Europe. There is also an effect of climate change, as you can see in the slide. Climate change rise the temperature, and with the higher temperature, there is more habitat, I would say. We favor a lot of pathogen bacteria, viruses, and so on, and so we need also to consider that. So although we have been doing a lot, the pressure on the water sector is going on, and moreover, I must say that there is also a big threat coming from toxic chemicals that are entering in the biological cycle, and we have a lot of evidences of the effects of these chemicals in different environments, both on biodiversity and humans. Most of the time, we first see the effects on biodiversity, on some species, and then we realize that we have the effects on the humans. When I was quite new for WWF, almost more than 30 years ago, I visited the WWF US, and I was lucky enough to show up in a lecture by a scientist called Theo Colburn. She was one of the main scientists studying toxic chemicals. And I must say that we were all horrified by what she said, and she then wrote in a book called Our Stolen Future. She said that she was observing a lot of effects on fish, for instance, fish, and on many other organisms, and there was this. She observed the same kind of effects that we then found in the human beings. For instance, the effects of endocrine disruptors that somehow are similar, mime somehow the same effects of our hormones, and so they can interfere in different function of our bodies, including the sexual system, the newborns, and so on. So that's very worrying. Sorry. The concern now has been enlarged to microplastics, and because we realize that microplastics are everywhere, and again they entered in the life cycle, the food chain, and by entering in the food chain, they are really entering in a lot of species and animals' body, and also our own bodies. So that's another big problem. We have the big problem of the antimicrobial resistance. because we are assuming a lot of drugs throughout the drinking water. Sometimes these kind of drugs are used in the life for the livestock and other activities, and there is an increasing alarm for the resistance to antibiotics and other substances. In other words, we are undermining our capacity to deal with disease. As I already said, there is also a problem with the heat, but there is also a problem with other extreme events caused by climate change. Just think about the big disasters, or the big floods, or the big impact of hurricanes that are we have always. It's not the hurricanes or the cyclones or the typhoons are not caused by climate change itself, but climate change, as I said, is a multiplier. So we have they are more intense, much more intense, and somehow we suspect that they are also more frequent. So that's everything among all can cause also pollution. So, for instance, we don't have a safe water after a flood or a big event like that. I worked with many others. I was part of the big campaign for a chemical regulation in the EU, for a regulation called REACH. This regulation was very important, especially because in the past it was almost impossible to deal with chemical pollution because of the intellectual property of different chemicals. In other words, the industries didn't wanted to publish, to show what kind of substances they were using in their productions, because of industrial secret. It was to them it was an industrial secret. Step by step we are trying, and this regulation is trying to say that health is much more important than industrial secret. So of course we try to preserve the industries from being robbed by their secrets, but at the same time we want them to say to us what kind of substances they are using, in order to understand if they are safe or not, if the other substances can be used. In fact, many times what happened was that because of the public pressure against a substance used in the productive cycle, the companies were forced to change, and to especially to look for something else. And sometimes they used some natural elements. I remember once they were using toxics substances to clean up something, and then they realized that they could have been using lemon juice, and the lemon juice was more effective and much more, of course, it was not damaging, harming for public health. So that's something that we are trying to do in the EU. Of course, there are very big pressure to in order to stop or to undermine the regulation. And I think that the public awareness should stay very high, should always be very high, because otherwise we can lose what we have gained in the last decades. As I said, humans and biodiversity have the same threats. You can look for some of the different docu films by David Attenborough and others that show many cases in which the threats that we are doing to biodiversity show to be the same that we are doing to ourselves. And as I said, there are many chemicals that throughout the water, the air, and soil impact biodiversity. There is bioaccumulation, biomagnification that I have been talking about. There is the degradation of habitats, the endocrine disruption that I refer to. Sometimes is you don't need a lot of molecules, but just a few molecules of some of the substances that are similar or mimic hormones to completely disrupt our body and our organism. As I said, this kind of disruption can end up with reproductive disorders. I don't want to go into details, but that was something that really struck us when Theo Corbyn spoke more than 30 years ago. And the consequences are very important for the difficulties and in the reproductive system. Just think about to one of the real victim of the human being that is the polar bear. The polar bear is not only threatened by climate change because the habitat is shrinking. The glaciers are shrinking, but there have been some evidence of individuals that are hermaphrodite because of all the pollution that goes to the Arctic. It's a natural tendency that sorry, I had to drink a little bit of water. So I was saying that the Arctic is contaminated by toxic chemicals that drift and accumulate throughout long-range transport, and so we have a bioaccumulation, and many the poor polar bear suffer of a lot of consequences. But I say polar bear because they are at the top of the food chain, but of course it's all over. And with climate change and the fusion of the glaciers, most of the contamination and the pollution that was trapped in the glaciers are coming back. So we are in a very worrying somehow situation. Um, there is a small decrease of chemical hazards to health in Europe, but the use of the most harmful chemicals is increasing. And you see we will see the effects on health. They have a very heavy effects on the health. Some many progress on POPs, the so-called POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and polycycle aromatic hydrocarbons. But although we are doing some progress on some of the chemicals, we are not. We are experiencing new threats, and we are especially worried about the so-called combined effect. So the mixture toxicity of many chemicals altogether that can amplify the effects one of the other. Some of the chemicals are below the safe indicator level, but somehow we shouldn't be so sure that being under the safe indicator is safe, because as we have seen in the last years, sometimes for some of these substances, a few molecules can be harmful all the same. But I'm referring especially to endocrine disruptors and these kind of substances. So we have also some substances that are restricted, but we still have evidence of their presence in the environment. Although we are not always sure that they were phased out. For instance, some times ago, several years ago, more than 10 years ago, in Italy, a factory using DDT was found. So there sometimes you have this kind of problems. Maybe it was 20 years ago. I don't know. I don't remember, but I remember very well the fact that we found out that there was somebody that was producing a DDT in Italy where it is forbidden. Environmental health and inequality. Well, I think that all of you can think about situations in which the rich areas of your cities are less polluted or not polluted at all, and you have more nature, and you have better conditions, while the poorer areas are more polluted, and the life is much more degraded somehow. And this sort of inequality on environment is something that is in countries, that's for sure, but it is also among countries, of course. Some also because the richer countries, especially in the past, had the tendency to export their pollution to other areas and other countries. You probably remember all the issue of waste coming from Western countries to African countries or to other countries. So that's a big problem. So that's something that we have to deal with, because as for climate change, we have to be sure that everybody has got access to the transition, to the benefit of the transition. We have to be sure that the pollution is not taken away from richer countries to poorer countries. That's something that we cannot accept. It's morally unacceptable. Um, and of course, I was talking about inequalities in the countries. And I wanted to tell you that there are several examples of many things that can prevent poorer to have more tools to resist or to take away pollution. They can have difficulties in afford air filters and conditioners. They can have poorer water. They can have more contamination in food, so for instance, they cannot afford organic food, or they tend to buy food that is cheaper, and sometimes it is cheaper because it's less safe. So these kind of things are very important in considering the inequalities in pollution. Of course, there is also a issue of areas, but unfortunately, we must say that pollution is, as climate change is quite common, uh, uh, democratic. Pollution is everywhere, but that there are cities in which the level of pollution is very, very high. Not only poor cities, because Dubai is not poor. I've been there and it's not poor at all. But I must say that is very polluted because of the production of energy with fossil fuels. And we have a very high level of pollution in several cities around the world. Of course, for instance, electric vehicles instead of endothermic driven vehicles, or fossil fuel driven vehicles, fossil fuels driven vehicles are much less polluting, not only because they don't use fossil fuels, but also because they are more efficient. So there is even there is some calculation saying that an electric car is less pollutant than a gasoline car. Although even when the electric power is produced with coal. So that's an example of efficiency that can overcome even the way they produce electric power. Of course, coal is the worst fossil fuel. All the fossil fuels are very a big source of pollution. Also, gas is a big source of pollution, but the coal is the worst one. So it's not a way to say go on with fossil fuels. On the contrary, we have a situation in which a benefit for climate and for CO2 emission reduction can be also a benefit for our health. sorry. You can see that my country, Italy, is very polluted. Especially we have a lot of pollution that is somehow stationary in the Po Valley, Pianura Padana, the valley of the river Po, that is the main river in Italy, the biggest river in Italy. You can see that part of the issue is because we have mountains here that keep the pollution in the valley. But as I said a lot of time to the people that were saying to me, "Oh, this is why we have pollution in the Po Valley." It doesn't matter if the pollution is staying because of the mountains. You cannot take the mountains off, so you have to take out the pollution to stop polluting. That's the only way to deal with the health effects of our, air pollution. As I said, are very important. We have a lot of brain and nervous system consequences we are not aware of. Even in a child, we have a lot of problems in the cognitive functions, and this is something that have been investigated a lot by scientists. And we have a lot of problems for our blood circulation, cardiovascular system, that is that is one of the main cause of premature death. We have a lot of problems with respiratory system, and this is quite easy to think about if we think to air pollution. And we have, as I said, reproductive system problems. We have skin and blood and bones problems, and we have also problems with our digestive system. As I said, the children are the really I wouldn't say the main victim because it's difficult to make a sort of rating, but I think that the children are really affected by pollution. Also because of their organism is not formed yet, but for many reasons we are not going to investigate today. But you can have make some research about. So it can affect a lot of organs, and this is quite worrying. But you see that they say the brain can be damaged by pollution, even the brain. We are talking about the new sources of pollution. I think that microplastic is the one that we should better investigate, and especially people should better understand, because sometimes we don't think about the different sources of microplastic, and especially we don't think about our clothes that can pollute the environment, even not only when we wash the clothes, but also in many other in everyday life they can pollute our organism. there are cosmetics, there are plastic bottles, there are of course foams, so any kind of soap that we use for our washing machine, a lot of sources for microplastic pollution. And not only we can ingest and accumulate microplastic in our body, but there is some research on the possibility of DNA and cellular damage, and even one of the main problems of our times, that is inflammation, the inflammations of our organism, that can cause a lot of damages to our body. So I was I talked already about co-benefits. I think that this is very, very important, and I will never stress enough this, because in an age in which we are told that we have not enough money to deal with all the problems of our times, we can address a lot of big problems that really affect our lives with some actions that have benefits for many of those problems. For instance, phasing out of fossil fuels will help us to eliminate some of the most important sources of pollution. But we have also other ways for deal with pollution and having co-benefits. For instance, when you think about fossil fuels, I think that you never think about the indoor pollution. The indoor pollution is a serious problem, and there are several researches showing that gas, the gas we use in our homes, in our flats, is part of this problem. So if we use more electricity and less gas in our houses for heating and for cooking, it will be a good thing for climate, but we will have also a lot of benefits for our health. In fact, in doctors and also governments some years ago started to talk about an approach that is called One Health. One Health means that our health, biodiversity health, climate health, environment health are all connected, and so we have to have an approach that is not only dealing with directly with our health, but also with our environment. I mean, it was not a big finding, because I mean it would have been quite normal to think that we are that our health is impacted by the environmental problems or the environmental degradation. But unfortunately, it's only in the last 2 decades that this concept have been really driven to the real consequences. And so you see that there is a direct connection. Some of you know, and if you don't know, please go and read a paper made by Pope Francis and an encyclical letter called Laudato Si. It's not a letter only for Catholic people. It's a letter that was developed for all the people of that wanted to act for preserving our common home. And in fact, there many times Pope Francis and others talked about this letter with other religious leaders. In fact, I think that another Christian leader had a big influence on the letter itself, Bartholomew of the Greek Orthodox Church. So it's not it's quite unusual as an encyclical because it's also there is a lot of religion, there is a lot of moral issue because caring for our common home and caring for the earth is something that is not only a damage but should be seen as a sin, a real sin, but it is also a sort of dictionary for caring for the health, in which you can find a lot of real clues about the problems and the solutions. I said many times that together is possible, and I think that this is something we should always remember. But for pollution, the connection is much easier because we see the effect of the pollution on our health. We really should be acting together because getting rid of the pollution, getting rid of all the consequences we have been seeing in this lesson, but also in the other two lessons, but probably many other lecture that you will find in this course. Dealing with all those problems is possible if we act together. And so I must say that one form of pollution we haven't been talking about is the pollution of the capacity of human beings of looking for the common goods, the common benefits altogether. This is a capacity that we have been losing in the last years. We are always more alone with a lot of tools, electric, digital tools, but much less relationships, especially in the Western world. And this is something we should get rid. So the since Pope Francis was talking about the integral human ecology, probably each one of us should think about the sources of pollution, not only the physical pollution that we are exposed to. And I hope that altogether we will get rid of those kind of pollution because we have to go for the health, the real prosperity. And I always underline that the definition of prosperity by the World Health Organization is physical and mental health. So even the this organization underline that there is not only one kind of health, so there is not only one kind of pollution, and we should get rid of all sources of pollution. Have a good day or a good night. Bye.